Databricks has a great platform around its core product, Apache Spark. But how are you going to use your DevOps toolset to automate this platform? In this little video series, I would like to get to the bottom of this question. Hi, my name is Sasha. Welcome to this channel. If this is your first time here and you want to learn more about machine learning, advanced analytics and cloud computing, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. In today's part of this series, we are going to explore how to set up Azure Databricks, how to set up our DevOps pipeline, and how to connect these two things together. So let's get started. To be able to use Databricks with any kind of DevOps pipeline, I need, of course, two major things. First of all, a Databricks service. And the second thing I need is, of course, some kind of DevOps toolset. In my case, I'm using Azure DevOps. So to get started, I'm here in my Azure portal. Click on Create a Resource and search for Databricks. So I'm selecting Azure Databricks now. Click on Create. And a form, so-called Blade, opens up. So I have to enter a workspace name. I call it Data Insights. Select my subscription, either create a new resource group or use an existing one. In my case, I would like to create that service in the YouTube resource group. Then I select the location nearby. In my case, that's West Europe. And since we are using premium features throughout this tutorial, I'm selecting Premium. I don't want to add that to my own virtual network. It's perfectly fine if Azure Databricks creates its own virtual network. And then I click on Create. While this is provisioning, I'm switching to my Azure DevOps portal. Click on Create a new project. Again, give that project a useful name. I'm going to call it MLOps minus Databricks. I can give that thing also a description if I'd like to, but I leave it empty and select the visibility. In my case, I'll pick private and click Create. So that's set up. After that, I'll move to repos where I want to store my notebooks and other assets later on and create a new one. README is okay and initialize that. So I've got my repo now set up, and in the meantime also my Azure Databricks account was set up. So let's move to my portal again and click on my Data Insights icon, which I created, and click on Launch Workspace. And it's automatically signing me into the Azure Databricks environment. To get started pretty quickly, I click on my workspace, go to users and go to my user account. Yeah, there are some demo data already in there, but I want to import some already prepared notebooks. I just have to select them. And I prepared already a few notebooks for this video series called Wine Quality, which is doing a wine quality model creation and later on the operationalization of that model. And I click import. Like always, I'm going to publish the whole code as well as the notebooks, everything you need on GitHub, and put the GitHub link to the description below that video. So I'll click on that folder which I just created, and in here there are 5 notebooks which I'm going to use throughout this series. A second step I need to do is, of course, hooking up Databricks to my DevOps pipeline. And to be able to grant my DevOps pipeline any access rights to this Databricks workspace, I need to create some credentials. So I go to the user icon in the right corner, click on user settings and go to access tokens. As you can see, there are already some tokens in there, but I want to create a new one. And in this case for Azure DevOps, lifetime 90 days is good enough. And I can also set that up that it's never expiring. In this case, I just have to delete the lifetime and click on generate. But in my case, I just need it for 7 days and click generate. That token is pretty important. I'm going to need that in my DevOps pipeline. So I'm copying that to a secure place and click on done. And here is my newly created token. So the next thing I want to do is connecting each of my notebooks to my Git repo in the DevOps pipeline. To do that, I'm moving to my first notebook. And in the right corner, there is a revision history tab. I can click on that, so the panel will open. And up here is a link to be able to link that to a Git repo. So I'm clicking on that and just have to specify the link to my DevOps system link, adding that, and the relative path of that notebook within the Git repo. I just want to call it notebook / and then the Python file, branches master, and click on save. That will be an initial commit message. It's committing, syncing, synced. And when I switch back to my DevOps pipeline and just refresh the view of my files, now there is a notebook section and my first notebook in here. Let's do the same thing with all the other notebooks. Click on link and it's automatically using the same link I used before. Just have to delete path. Great, and as you can see, all 5 notebooks are now synced to my repo. And every time I'm changing something in here, like, I don't know, uncommenting things like these 2, go to the revision, click on save now, and it would automatically sync to my Git repo. So the next thing I want to do is really creating my first pipeline, or the first steps in my pipeline. To be able to do that, I'm moving back to Azure DevOps, go to pipelines, click on pipelines, and click on create pipeline. During my small YouTube series about using MLOps with Azure DevOps, I used the classic editor. Today, or in this series, I would like to use the new pipeline version. So in this case, a purely YAML-based approach. So I click just on Azure Repos Git to select my Git repo. I want to start with a completely empty pipeline, which just contains a kind of a hello world step to get started. So that pipeline is in this case triggered every time the master branch get a commit and push. I'm using the latest Ubuntu image, which is exactly what I want to have. And there's 2 demo steps which I don't need, so I'm going to delete those. Of course, I'm not able to remember all the nitty-gritty details of that YAML structure. Therefore, I'm using the show assist to generate some snippets, code snippets or YAML snippets in that case for me. And to get started, the first thing I want to do is create some kind of Python environment. Therefore, I'm choosing my Python version, in this case, Python version 3.6, add that to my path and click on the add button. And it would automatically add that snippet to my YAML file. The next thing I would like to do is, of course, connect somehow that pipeline to Databricks. To be able to do that, I'm using a command line interface version of Databricks. And to be able to use that in the pipeline, I first need to install that. So I'm just calling a bash command. In my case, I'm going to use the pip command to install the command line tools, the Databricks command line tools. So I'm just selecting script, inline script, and put the pip install update if necessary parameter, as well as the Databricks -CLA package in there, which gives me all the capabilities I need. Click on add again and have my task in here. To be able to see that better later on while debugging, I also should add a tag called display name in there, just display name and the name of my task to make it a little bit more readable. Up next, I need to connect this Databricks CLI to my real Databricks environment. And for that reason, I created that token. To be able to connect that to that token, I'm just adding another block in here. It's again a bash block. In this case, a multi-line bash block. So I've got my configure Databricks CLI in here. And I'm just creating out of 2 variables my configuration, which is the Databricks host URL and the token which I created. And therefore I need to set up everything in the parameter section to be able to run that. So let me add those two variables. So I click up here in the right corner on the variable section, create some new variable in here, a variable called Databricks token with the value I got back from my token generation. And I'm checking that this is a secret, so keep this value secret, so it's not shown in the pipeline itself, but just stored within the Azure DevOps system. So I'm clicking on OK again, click on Save. All the other variables I'm going to put directly in the YAML file. Therefore, I need as a second parameter my Databricks host name. I'm just going to add that beneath the trigger segment, just call it variables, Databricks host, and the URL is just the region.azuredatabricks.net, the region where I added my workspace. Let's test what I created so far by just click on Save and Run and call it Initial Azure Pipeline and click on Save and Run. So let's check. So it installed the Azure Databricks CLI and the configuration went good as well. So that looks good. So let's get back to the pipeline. The first pipeline run went well, and go to that pipeline and edit it to add further functionality in here. So the next thing I want to do is really create a kind of a collaboration environment, which means that within my Azure Databricks environment, I'm in my user workspace and more or less creating or changing my things in my workspace, testing things. Every time I click on Save Now, I'm checking those values back into my repo. And what I would like to happen then is that there is also a shared space, that this will be pushed to my shared space and executed there in a central environment in the end. To be able to do that, I can again use the Azure Databricks CLI. So let's go back to in the pipeline, add another task. And that task is just using, again, a bash command. I'm nearly only using bash commands in that pipeline, which is just calling the CLI command again with a parameter workspace and creating a directory path where my notebooks will be stored in a central space. Therefore, I'm again using a variable, in this case, databricks.notebooks.path. So let's set up that variable. And in my case, shared/YouTube. So in the shared space, just in a YouTube path. But creating the folder is one thing. The second thing I want to do is, of course, importing those notebooks. So let's go back to the step section, searching for a bash command, using an inline command. And in that inline command, I'm just using a Databricks workspace, import a whole directory, override the notebooks if they already exist, using my notebooks directory out of that repo. So that's just the path to my local repo. And that is the path of the destination, which is my Databricks.notebook.path variable. Just adding that task again and giving it a useful name. So let's just call it import notebooks. So after I uploaded my notebooks in a central space, the next thing I want to do, of course, is create a cluster where those notebooks could be executed and start the cluster. Again, I'm using a bash command for that. And this script is a little bit more complex. So let me quickly paste that into the section and go through that script step by step. So what I want to do is, of course, create a new variable called cluster name. So the name of my cluster, give that thing a name like ML, for example. Then I need a variable called cluster ID, which I want to use later on, leave it empty for now. And since I'm creating a complete new cluster, I also need some further variables. In my case, one of the Spark version, one of the node ID, the driver node type, so what kind of VMs. It should automatically terminate after 15 minutes of idle time. I want at least one worker node running, maximum of 4 worker nodes. So some basic things I'm setting up here. How do I get those values? I created a manual cluster in here, for example, that playground cluster or the GPU cluster, just clicked on create. gave that cluster a name, choose if it's standard or high concurrency mode, if there's a pool, choosing a runtime, for example, 6.1. Yeah, let's pick a GPU version. Time to terminate, 15 minutes. I can enable auto scaling, 1 machine up to 4 machines, and so on and so on. So I picked all the necessary variables, saved it, or what you also can do is directly go to JSON. And here we go. Here's exactly what I used in here. So Spark version, what type of machine nodes, minimum workers, maximum workers. So I got all those values out of this section, and I just created a set of variables out of that. And now I'm going to use them. So let's go back to my script. So what I'm doing in here, I'm checking if the cluster is already existing. So clusters, list all the clusters, grep for only my cluster name. If that cluster exists, perfect. Give me the ID back. Otherwise, if the ID doesn't exist, create a complete new cluster. And I'm creating exactly that JSON, which you just saw, as a variable in here. So with a cluster name, the Spark version, some kind of configuration if I need that, node type ID, driver node type ID, so which kind of machines, my variables which I want to set, auto termination, enable elastic disks, my autoscalers, and so on and so on. So I'm creating all this more or less in here. And after that, I'm just executing Databricks cluster, create, give it my JSON, and get the response back. And from the response, I only need the ID of the cluster, storing that again in here. And to be able to reuse that in the next step, I'm pushing that to the Azure DevOps pipeline system in terms of setting a variable in Azure DevOps. The name of the variable is cluster ID, the one I created, the empty one I created up there, and give it the value of the cluster ID environment variable in this step. So that creates the cluster for me. And the second thing I need to do is, of course, start that cluster. And there is a pattern which you will see in my scripts quite often. First of all, I'm checking for the state of the cluster. Databricks cluster, get the cluster with a cluster ID with a variable which was set in the previous step, and just get the state out of that. After that, I'm checking the state. Is it terminated? If yes, please start the cluster. If it's pending, then sleep for 30 seconds and try that again. After the system was idle for 30 seconds, please check the cluster again. So I'm looping, I'm waiting until the asynchronous job of starting the cluster has been completed. I'm echoing something back to the standard output, so I see what's happening in the background. And hopefully, after the cluster is not in the pending state, it should be running. If yes, exit with a 0, so the step has completed successfully. If not, exit with a 1. So after the steps of creating a path for my notebooks, importing the notebooks to a central space, creating a new cluster, and spinning and starting that cluster, checking if it's running at some point in time, I would again like to test what I created so far. So let's just save that pipeline, give it a useful name again, click on save, and run my pipeline to test it. So perfect, the job completed successfully. So everything looks good so far. Took around about 6 minutes to create the cluster for the first time. So that looks good. It was pending. At some point in time it was running. It imported those 5 notebooks. So let's check if everything looks great also on the Databricks side. So I can cancel that. And the first thing I want to do is check if the notebooks have been uploaded. So let's go to shared. There is a folder called YouTube. And here are my notebooks. Looks good. Of course, they are not linked in this case because I'm not syncing them back again. In the cluster section, my newly created cluster is up and running. Currently 2 nodes, 1 head node and 1 worker node. Let's have a look in here. 15 minutes, 1 to 4. The machine size have been set to the correct VM type. Also the version have been set to the correct version. So it looks good so far. In the next video, we are going to explore how to train and store our model with the help of our DevOps pipeline. And we are going to use a service called MLflow, which is built into the Databricks platform. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. And if you've got ideas, comments or thoughts you would like to share with me, please use the comment section below. Take care and see you on the next video.